Aloha, inspired money makers. Welcome to another episode of Inspired Money, the live stream podcast that I proudly say is like no other money podcast. If it's your first time here, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Today we've got a fun topic for you: portfolio perspectives, balancing watch, wine, and car investments. In 2022, an Hermes Kelly bag set records at Sotheby's Paris, selling for an astonishing $346,000, marking it as the most expensive handbag ever sold in Europe. A few years earlier, in 2019, a rare bottle of Macallan's 60-year-old malt whiskey sold for $1.9 million. And when it comes to watches, the Patek Philippe Nautilus is highly coveted, selling at auction for multi-millions of dollars. But what does it mean if you own one of these iconic assets? In this episode, let's explore passion investing. That is, investing in non-traditional assets such as classic cars, watches, and wine. It generally allows you to enjoy the ownership of the asset while holding it in your portfolio. We'll learn from four special guests who they're going to discuss how passion investing not only can hold its value, but also allow you to enjoy the journey along the way. Before we introduce our panelists, this episode is brought to you by my financial advisory firm, Runnymede Capital Management. If you have not yet plotted your financial goals and documented a financial plan, I invite you to do a 3-minute plan. It's free, and I can tell you that a little planning can go a long way. The earlier you start, the better. Go to inspiredmoney.fm/getplan, and we can have a short conversation afterwards. Let's bring in our panel of experts. I'm very excited to have all these guys here. We have Jasem Al Zeraei, known as Patekaholic on Instagram. He's a prominent figure in the watch community, celebrated for his deep passion and expertise in, surprise, surprise, Patek Philippe collecting. And he's judged different watch events, and I'm so glad that he can be with us all the way from Kuwait. Jasem, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction.
We have a very international panel today. Let me introduce Dan Spitz. I think this is his third time on the podcast. He's becoming a regular. Dan is a third-generation master watchmaker. He's also lead guitarist and a co-founding member of the legendary thrash metal band Anthrax. He boasts 3 Grammy nominations, over 30 million albums sold, and has a prestigious background in luxury watchmaking, having studied at the renowned Wostep in Switzerland and served as the head of complications specialist at Chopard. Dan, you're coming from Delray Beach, Florida, your new setup.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me, and hello to everybody. This is my new atelier, a few steps from the beach, where I'm just happy to rip into beautiful vintage timepieces.
It's looking great. So you and I are the domestic U.S. guys on the show today. We have Brian Freedman, who is U.S. based. He's a wine, spirits, travel, and food writer, restaurant and beverage consultant. He's also a drinks educator. He's a regular contributor to Food and Wine, Forbes, Whiskey Advocate, and other major publications. He hosts tasting events for corporate clients and consults for private clients on their wine and spirit collections. He wrote the book Crushed: How a Changing Climate is Altering the Way We Drink, which was published back in 2022 to critical acclaim. But he's coming to us from Newbury, London this evening. Welcome.
Thanks, Andy. It's great to be here, and it's great to be here with such an amazing panel. I'm actually in Newbury, England right now, about an hour and a half outside of London, and I'm here just for a few days to explore the world of Highclere Castle gin. If that looks familiar to you, that's Downton Abbey right there. So I'm here at the Carnarvon Arms Hotel in the pub, which feels strange that I don't have like a great ale with me right now, but that's okay. But I'm excited to join you today and talk wine with you.
Well, you're coming from a very cool place. And yes, Newbury is not in London, now that I know.
I was saying it all day yesterday, so I'm there with you.
Yeah, brain fart. We also have rounding out our panel today, Nick Baldelli-Boni, my godbrother, who lives in Tuscany. He can trace his family roots there for over 900 years. He's the founder of Cars in Tuscany, a platform dedicated to showcasing classic and luxury cars against the scenic backdrop of Tuscany. He blends his passion for automobiles with the rich cultural and visual appeal of the Italian countryside. Nicki, welcome back. Are you muted? You're muted.
Oh, I'm muted. No, I should be okay now. It's nice to be here. Thank you for having me again. And yeah, Cars in Tuscany is my fun project. It's not my work. I do something completely different from Cars in Tuscany, but it's started out as something fun to do in the winter last year, and it's starting to pick up. Although we started less than a year ago, so I'm excited to be here with all you other amazing folks and share some of this with you.
I want to show everybody what Nicki's hobby looks like. We're going to show a short trailer.
It's a professional hobby.
Well, if you're not watching right now, if you're just listening to this episode, you have to go to YouTube/Inspired Money to watch that. It leaves me with wanting to visit Nicki like tomorrow so I can get some gelato, drive in a Ferrari.
Always welcome.
Enjoy the sights. That was crazy. Crazy cinematography. Darn it. I can almost say it. Well, we're going to have a really interesting discussion today. I want to welcome viewers, whether you're watching on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, wherever you're watching from. Please drop a comment. Welcome your questions and comments throughout. Share with us where you are tuning in from. And let's just go straight into segment one. Alternative investments, including watches, fine wines, and classic cars, offer unique opportunities outside of traditional stocks and bonds. These tangible assets attract investors seeking diversification, protection against market volatility, and the potential for significant returns. Watches, particularly from brands like Rolex and Patek Philippe, have seen value appreciation driven by rarity and craftsmanship. Fine wines, with a rich history of investment, continue to grow in demand due to their finite production and the increasing global interest in high-quality vintages. Classic cars, especially models from Ferrari, Aston Martin, and Porsche, have become highly sought after, with their value often outpacing traditional investments. Investors are drawn to these assets not only for their potential financial returns, but also for the tangible enjoyment they offer. Collecting these items adds a personal dimension to investment strategies, providing both aesthetic pleasure and portfolio stability. By understanding these alternative investments, investors can better assess their fit within a diversified portfolio. I want to start with Jasem, since there was an image of Jasem in there with his watches. You've been collecting Patek Philippe for years. What is it about the craftsmanship and rarity of watches like the Nautilus that makes it so valuable an asset for collectors?
I was interested in watches in general for a long time. Patek Philippe happened to come into my realm of thought many years into my watch collecting journey. I recall it was maybe 2007, 2008, early 2008 when I was, basically shown the road to Patek Philippe. Basically, have gotten a lot of hand holding by a mentor of mine. And so, being a watch lover, full stop, it has nothing to do with investments or assets or all that stuff. I I bought Patek because I wanted to own what I perceived, and I continue to think that way, was the most interesting and most coveted and most sought after brand between all the watch brands in its entirety. I think COVID has changed the mindsets of a lot of people, including myself, in terms of how you buy. Pre-COVID, I personally, I'm talking about myself. I used to buy what I loved, and I didn't care about the intrinsic or the carry over value in the future, or whether it became it was held as an asset into my portfolio or not. I think during COVID and during the immense growth in price and immense growth in value, even the finest collector, even the billionaires of the collecting watch community, have a little bit been tested with regards to their decision making when they come to buy watches. And so we still buy what we like, but we sure want that what we like holds value. And so the I think the perception have changed, and this is why you have the Nautilus, which is a very basic watch to produce, trade much higher than a 5370, which is a split seconds chronograph in a platinum case and an enamel dial. And so you see this dynamic, or like this huge shift of taste, of decision, and this is like a tectonic shift in the market. I like to make a comparison. I don't know whether this comparison holds any truth or not. I still recall when I was a student in Arizona in ASU, and Cadillac had just released the Escalade, and it was an expensive truck, and it didn't really sell well until the younger crowd or the younger generation picked up on it and making it the hot new car, and it became what it has become ever since. The Nautilus has enjoyed the same ride as an Escalade, and it started off with the 5980 in steel and the blue dial. And when that watch came to the market, all of a sudden, every young person, every entrepreneur, every person with with 30, $45,000 in the bank account, who went for an Hublot or an Audemars or a traditional Rolex, have all of a sudden turned their eyes onto this brand that was owned and worn and collected by billionaires, kings, queens, etc., etc. And now there's a watch that they can actually wear, and then the ride has moved into where it has come to now.
Thank you for sharing that. Dan, you're a third generation watchmaker. Can you talk a little bit about Patek? And then also, it's like, do you believe that the boom in the luxury watch market, can it continue? Do you think it'll plateau? Do you think there will be corrections? Talk about this market.
Well, I'm going to come from a totally different perspective than the more modern timepieces that he just spoke about. Because the first watch I was ever in was when I was 8 years old, sitting on my grandfather's lap in his watch and jewelry store. He was a watchmaker and was a Patek Calatrava. But these are older watches. And then when I went to school after my music career and headed to Switzerland, and then I was the head of Chopard, 2 different continents, and training other watchmakers, I got to see a lot of timepieces across my bench. Those timepieces are now considered vintage watches. That's where the quiet resurgence has been for a long time, equating it to cars. If you had a 63 split window Corvette back when I grew up, it was cool, but it wasn't vintage yet. If you have one now, it was better than putting your money anywhere in the stock market if it's in good condition. And that's what happened to vintage. That's my expertise. It's complicated timepieces, chronographs, and vintage. That's what this new workshop by the beach here in Delray is fully set up for, just to show and talk about what we're talking about today. Why my new workshop is strictly doing vintages. There's not many of us left at this level that have seen all of these old watches like I have. And the resurgence of this, as from an investing standpoint and a love standpoint, is deep. is very, very deep as the younger generation is to the modern watches, knowing all the serial numbers, and does the serial number match the band of the Nautilus? The whole other realm of this is vintage watches, vintage Pateks, vintage Vacheron Constantin, vintage Cartier. The prices have gone through the roof. It's insanity, and they all need repair, and not beyond repair, restoration, because there is no more parts. Just like cars, there is no more parts. There's no parts in Switzerland. Your watches in Switzerland, after you have them for 20 years, the company no longer legally has to sell you or give us as watchmakers parts. So these modern watches, 80 years from now, from a micromechanic standpoint, are not going to fare as well as the vintage watches, because the way they're made internally is as small and as thin as they can make them, which means all the pinions and gears that drive the mechanics are extremely thin, and they cannot be remade the traditional way. Older watches, the wheels are thick, they're overbuilt. They were built at a time where everyone needed a watch, and the watch needed to last for generations and generations and generations in the mechanics. So they can be restored forever. In fact, I have the first Rolex ever made on my bench right here from 1926 that was made in-house. So investing in vintage watches is what I'm seeing is just exploded, and the return on investment is crazy. I mean, I'm sitting here with an old Submariner in front of me that I've been restoring. It's been to numerous watchmakers that could not fix it correctly. And the woman collector, who there's a lot of very big woman collectors out there, who's also, this is part of their portfolio. And she's made a good amount of money on this, and again, better than investing anywhere else.
So it sounds like rarity and age definitely come into play. Brian, I want to ask you about wine. Has there been some softening in the fine wine market? Can you talk about market trends and maybe the potential impact of climate change longer term?
Yeah, collecting wine it's been a little bit complicated, to steal a term from my watchmaking friends here. For a long time, when it came to investing in wine and even just collecting wine, there was a sense that you could get into it for a reasonable amount of money, right? Perfect example. My wife and I bought a house two and a half years ago. So I moved my entire collection, modest collection, a few thousand bottles, but inevitably I found some things that I had forgotten that I even owned. And one of them to me really sort of encapsulated and embodied what has happened with the world of fine and collectible wine. And that's that this was a bottle of, I believe it was 2004 Dujac Moët Saint-Denis, just a village wine, which I bought on release for under $100. And I found it, and I just, I went on to Wine Searcher and a couple of the other sites. And this wine now, if you can find it, is clearing $450, $500 for a bottle, from obviously a legendary producer from a wonderful village. But it's very hard to get into that segment of the market when, for a great village wine, you have to drop $400 to $500. So the trends have been interesting. I will say, and you brought up something very important, and that's the impact of climate change. Every vintage of even the best wines in the world, there is inherently going to be what we call vintage variation. And that's a beautiful thing when it comes to wine, right? You don't want every single bottle of, your DRC Romanée Conti to taste the same. You don't want every bottle of your first growth Bordeaux to taste the same. But what's happening now is that the climate is changing in such a way that it's becoming more and more extreme and more unpredictable. So, we could have a so-called great vintage of wine from a particular appellation, insofar as the wine tastes great, it smells wonderful, and it has great aging potential. But we also might have to be dealing with the fact that very little was potentially produced in that vintage because of some of the impacts of climate change. So the roller coaster effect of climate change is really having a very sort of odd impact on the world of collectible wine. A winemaker, as I was researching for my book Crushed, a winemaker in, of all places, Texas Hill Country. She said to me, Brian, it's not so much about global warming as it is global weirding. And I love that idea. It's vaguely terrifying as well. And it's just, you know, you might have what looks like a great fruit set in you know, your vineyard, your village in Champagne, but then all of a sudden in May, this rogue hailstorm comes and knocks out 30 to 40% of your potential crop that year. So you might be able to produce a fabulous vintage Champagne, but significantly less of it. So the impact on the collector's market as well as the drinker's market is very real and very complicated.
Nicki, how about cars? I'm assuming that rarity also comes into play. If you're looking at something like a Ferrari or a Porsche as investment vehicles, how important is the element of drivability versus collectible value?
Well, that's a little bit of how all of my projects started. I turned 40 and I had sort of a midlife crisis, and I did what any reasonable man should do if he has a midlife crisis and he can afford it, which is I bought a vintage Ferrari. The car I bought is becoming extremely desirable. That's why I chose to buy that instead of something modern, because I figured maybe in a few years I'll still be able to buy something modern I like a, you know, a brand new Porsche or something like that. But this car in 10 years is not going to be affordable to me, at least now. I bought a 360 Spider with a manual gearbox. So it's a rare car. There's only 1,641 of them. That's it. And that car, since the previous owner, who I knew, bought it 10 years ago, has doubled in value in 10 years. Doubled in value. And the manual market just keeps going up because there are so few of them. And I don't think it's so dissimilar from watches in a certain sense. You know, obviously it's different. And just like watches, there are watches that go for multi-million dollar prices and watches that go for in hundreds of thousands and all that. So, and they need repair. Just like Dan said, they need to be repaired. But on average, a good car is also a good investment. Of course, if you have to diversify, if you can't put all your eggs in one basket. If I had $10 million to spend right now, I wouldn't buy, 10 different Ferraris. Yes, I would. But no, I would put money in the stock market because on the long term, the stock market's obviously going to give a better return in a certain sense. But if you have a few 100,000 to move somewhere and you want a good return, you buy the right car and you maintain it, you are going to make some money off of it. Or at least you won't lose any in certain cases. The car I have, the 360 Spider, averages about 10 a year in increase in value. If you bought a Testarossa, which is now it's older, becoming more desirable after the 30-year mark. Those cars have literally doubled in price in the last 5 years. So it's impressive.
Thank you. Well, I have a feeling that hanging out with you guys are expensive friends to hang out with, for better or worse. It sounds like it's going to be more fun, but it's going to put a dent in my wallet.
Coffins don't have wallets, so we might as well live it up.
What's happening here is, I think my world here in vintage and indie is very similar to what Nick is speaking about with vintage Ferraris. Most of my collectors, they're driving Ferraris. Most of their collections probably, they probably have about $1 million pulled out and into vintage. And they're doing very well with that. So it's a similar situation to what he says. There's just so many of these timepieces out there. And from someone like me, I'm not someone who's buying or guiding someone as a collector into the fashion realm. Or what does it look like? Or how many supposed limited editions of a modern watch bullshit that they're trying to pump into the public from the big brands. There's obscure old watches where the mechanics have been destroyed, just like his Ferraris. So bad, when the Ferrari was in an accident, the watch has been in an accident. I can fix those watches here with lasers and stuff like that and rebuild them, but they're not worth the money that an original vintage timepiece that the person never polished ever in their life. Because every 5 or 6 years, an old mechanical watch, or any mechanical watch, it needs to be serviced, completely ripped apart, like ripping apart the Ferrari's engine, every single piece on my bench, and rebuilt. Now, if you don't do that every 5 years, well, every 5 years you did bring that in since the 1940s. Every time you bring it in, that watchmaker is going to give a quick polish to it, and he's going to take off a little bit of the gold, a little bit of the steel, just like a car. If that guy never did that, and he told the watchmaker, don't do that, those are the pieces that are worth a fortune. The pieces that used to be $800 on my bench when I was doing this many years ago and doing restoration of Patek Philippe's for many, many years. Those watches, they weren't too expensive back then. They're just astronomically priced if they haven't been polished. So this you have to be real careful if you're diving into the vintage watch world or modern indie watch world, and you need guidance. You definitely need someone like me. Unfortunately, there's not many of us out there.
Maintenance and care definitely matters. We're going to go to segment 2 and talk about valuation. Assessing the value and risks of collectibles like watches, fine wines, and classic cars involves understanding specific market dynamics, valuation techniques, and inherent risks. Valuation methods. For watches, key factors include brand, model, rarity, and condition. Auction results and expert appraisals are essential in determining value. Fine wines are valued based on vintage, producer reputation, and storage conditions, with professional ratings and scarcity driving prices. Classic cars are assessed by rarity, historical significance, and provenance, with indexes like the Historic Automobile Group International Top Index providing benchmarks. Risks. Market volatility can significantly impact collectible prices, especially during economic downturns. Liquidity is a challenge, as selling these items can take time. Provenance verification is crucial to avoid counterfeits and misrepresented items. Mitigation strategies. Investors should conduct thorough research, seek professional appraisals, and ensure proper storage and maintenance. Diversifying across different collectibles and traditional assets can help spread risk and enhance portfolio stability. Jasem, you talked about how things changed a little bit since the pandemic. I've heard you talk about the difficulty of procuring Patek Philippe watches. On the flip side, is there a risk of liquidity if you want to sell, if the resale market can sometimes be slow?
First off, I want to say that Nick and I are going to be good friends because I'm a Ferrari and a watch and car nut. If you haven't known until now. I think we need to take 2 steps back. I think we need to understand 2 major problems that have been solved over time. Number one, some communities have not had access to proper information. So if let's go back pre-Instagram. If you were in Italy, you had proper access to the communities, the watch shows, a few magazines, etc. Obviously, if you lived in Switzerland, that's a different ballgame because the major auction houses were there, so you had access to information. If you're in America, maybe even a much better experience in terms of knowledge or access, and even the internet had covered so little about watches and info and have moved the taste of the markets, because taste leads to proper or increased valuation over time. The second part is let's say security, maintenance, etc. So if you look at someone like me, I'm also besides watches, I also like cars. I've owned a Ferrari 599, a 430, a 458, a GT3 RS, the 2 versions. I currently own a Touring, etc. The reason why I don't go into vintage and why I never went into vintage watches myself is because in my region, the Middle East, we had such little information and such little guidance and such a few amount, if they even existed, in terms of people one would call experts that I can go to so I can get better knowledge. Now let's go back in 2 steps. What happened after Instagram? We became more knowledgeable. We had better access. I mean, Nick and I can be best friends in a week. We can probably drive our cars in the wine country. So the world has changed. Access has changed. And tastes are being swayed all the time with the big media guys, Hodinkee, Waco from Revolution, or whoever. They're the guys who are pushing the markets, especially also with the auction houses and the Italian dealer network, which we can go talk about for hours and hours. Now, accessibility continues to be hard in terms of new watches. However, if you want to buy vintage Patek, it is very easy. The problem is, what do you buy and from whom? Because the vintage market is not as easy as the modern market. Obviously, it's way easier than the Rolex vintage market. There's less changing of hands, there's less changing of movements, etc., etc. However, it is very hard to prove whether a dial has not been washed, whether cases have not been tacked by different goldsmiths, etc. There's so many barriers to entry into that market. However, if you have the funds and you have the time, you can very easily contact one of the dealers and make them their curator and build a pretty beautiful collection of vintage. If you go to modern, you have a risk. It's a tangible asset. You enjoy wearing it, as I am currently wearing a beautiful Rolex. But does it hold value over time? And that's the question which you always have to ask yourself. This is during the height of the pandemic and Corona and the explosion of prices, many people have come to the market to give their opinion, to say that these are tangible, solid, long-term assets. The problem is it's proven not to be the case today, because all these assets have deflated by 50, 60, 70%. A lot of watches have lost all of their value that they gained during the pandemic. And we have to go back to what's right. What's right is when you buy anything, watch, wine, whiskey, a car, you need to buy something that's produced in small volume, that has beautiful DNA, that there's history and a good solid background. And those things, you bet that maybe in the long term they make money. Now, is it better than the stock market? No, it's not. It's not. You take the whole watch index, compare it to what the S&P has done. If you invested in watches, you probably are not doing as well as the guy who put money in the S&P. So I think these are a portion of my personal portfolio, cars and watches, 20, 30%, a few $1,000,000, you throw it away. And as our friend Dan have said, you don't take money. There's no ATM in your coffin. So you need to enjoy life, and you hope that you make money. If so, you don't lose money. That's one of those things I myself think about.
Well, you cannot drive or wear the S&P 500. So there's something to that, even if the historical performance may not be as strong. Nicki, your thoughts?
I think, Jasem, you and I are going to be friends for more reasons than just the cars. I see a portrait of Winston Churchill behind you, so I presume you're a Churchill fan. And I always remember what he said when one of his aides went up to him and whispered, "Mr. Churchill, I think your fly is unzipped." And he said, "Dead birds don't fall out of trees." So I'm a big Winston Churchill fan. And I think the other one is Mike Tyson. So, wow, I think, is it?
It is.
But no, I agree. I think niche objects command niche prices and niche appreciations in time. The rarer it is, and the less touched it has been. It's the same for cars. The patina of antiquity that you're talking about with watches, it's the same thing on your car if it's been repainted, because for whatever reason it got repainted. And you're only going to see the rare pieces going up. It can't be otherwise. You'll never lose money on those. So take something that you know is unique and go from there. But I agree again with Jasem, not more than 20, 30% of what you can spend, because I don't think it makes sense to put all your eggs in one basket. I mean, you have to live it up, but you've got to be reasonable when you live it up in a certain sense.
I like the idea of reasonably living it up. Brian, how do you assess the potential of a particular wine vintage as an investment? And what role do professional ratings play?
So that's a great question. Professional ratings certainly have historically moved the market, right? When you had, you had sort of the two kings of the world wine ratings, right? And that was Wine Spectator and Robert Parker's Wine Advocate. That has become much more diffuse in recent years. So there's lots of other voices out there. Decanter is playing a big role in lots of other, websites, Instagram, just like Jasem was talking about when it comes to the watch market. But ratings certainly play a huge role. What's different about wine is
Oh, you got stuck.
Oh, I think I just froze. You got me back?
Yeah, you're back.
All right. Once, all the wine.
The castle he's in is too old.
It was, and it was different the year.
The Wi-Fi is spotty.
Yeah, those thick stone walls from the 14th century.
We'll see if he actually disconnects and comes back.
Yeah, but
So Dan,
Nick's in the better room. He's got the Italian reverb going there. It sounds unbelievable.
Yeah. This is a very old house. No walls in this house are less than 3 feet of solid stone because it's a medieval tower. I can't show you, but Andy's been. And but we had the cable. We wired every single room for internet. Otherwise, it was a nightmare.
So what I was trying to say earlier about vintage is, yes, he is totally correct. You need to find someone near you who is a master that's seen all these vintage timepieces, such as myself, because I've been doing it since I was such a young age. And that's what I do. I help collectors, meaning investors, with their watch portfolio. Yes, they have a passion for watches, but they also see how can I guide them and help them from a master watchmaker's standpoint. And that's how I have to let people know that numbers in modern watches are not going to equate to something like a 1960s Submariner like this, where, as you can see, every wheel and gear, I mean, this is almost like the size of a pocket watch, where I can remake all these parts. They're not disposable. It is not disposable, and that timepiece will last for centuries if taken care of, which means your investment will keep going up and up and up as the rarities and the amount of them that are out there being hacked to death by non-traditionally trained watchmakers go away. But you're going to need someone like me to authenticate that dial to see if it's been touched up, if everything is original, and then the prices keep going up and up and up as a car would. The modern day watches, I'm sorry, but from a watchmaking standpoint, I'm not a collector who's seeing modern timepieces by fashion, look, number, or the bullshit limited edition stuff that's pumped out by big brands. I don't see them. Well, I won't be here anymore, but on a watchmaker's bench 78 years from now, when the wheels and pinions are done, the watch is trashed. You can't make parts for them. So I do not see them as a very long term, meaning generational place to put your money. For now, if you want to ride it as a passion, I see that. Now, indie watchmaking, meaning new watches that are built by my friends who are in the indie world, they're building them like the watches I just showed you, built to last for centuries. So that's my 2 cents on the vintage world. You get yourself a good watchmaker. There's not many of us out there. This whole YouTube generation, unfortunately, has birthed YouTube self-taught watchmakers who are now doing Rolexes, and they've been in this one here. And please, make sure your watchmaker has the WOSTEP designation. I mean, I went to Switzerland, but the curriculum is taught worldwide, or another proper watchmaking school that you spent a minimum of, in Switzerland, it's 6 to 10 years to go to watchmaking school. Basically, you still don't know anything after that. You can't learn this shit from YouTube, pardon my language, but you just can't. And you can learn how to take apart a watch and put it back together, but that's not knowing all the intricacies of and damage you will do when something doesn't work and they try to basically hack away at it, and then they all end up a lot of them end up back on my bench. But get yourself someone to guide you into vintage, and it's a wonderful, never-ending world with the unknown brands. It's the fun of it. Finding out that there's this brand, it was so small, but the dial, the case, and the movement, like we were just talking about the Omega Man on the Moon 321 movement, it's the same people making that, but for some reason, it could have been for import duty taxes where, you know, they were maxed out at the big brands. So they had a sub brand, and they would ship the cases, the movements, the dials, and the hands coming from the same factory as that big brand's watch, and it's put together, and it, you know, Smith watchmaking and Bill's watchmaking, you can call it whatever you'd like. It's the same timepiece. It's the same exact piece that you could wear for a fraction of that price. And those are very limited, and those are starting to climb in assets in your portfolio.
We want to hear more about those. I wanted to see if Brian wanted to finish his thought from earlier.
Thank you. Sorry about that. What I was saying was inherent to collecting wine is there is a built-in increasing sense of rarity, because whereas plenty of people are collecting these wines and allowing them to stay in their cellar untouched, there are also people who, thank goodness, are taking full advantage of this most liquid of assets. And for every bottle, you know, of Richebourg, of La Tâche, of 61 Latour that's opened up, that's one less that can potentially be available to the market. The other thing to consider when investing in wine is, contrary to what is still a widespread popular opinion, even the greatest producers in the most legendary vintages, these wines are not going to last forever. And there's going to become a point of diminishing returns in terms of the pleasure that it could potentially give you. And therefore, to a certain extent, you know, its relevance to the collector's market. So you also have to really pay attention to the inherent evolution of these, you know, unstable liquids. You also, and I think Jasem said something important. He said, what are you buying and from whom? And this will be no surprise to anybody on this podcast, that there's a lot of questionable product out there. You know, maybe the liquid itself is fake. We know, you know, the story of Rudy. You know, if not, go down that rabbit hole. It's absolutely terrifying and horrifying. But even with legitimate bottles, it's all about provenance. How was it stored? How was it transported? Can you trace that the entire time? So having, you know, perfect storage throughout the life of that wine, from the time you have acquired it, and even going back to everyone else who's had it before, this is deeply, deeply important, because unlike a watch, a wine that has been stored improperly cannot be repaired. So you have to do your due diligence when you are considering investing in wine as an asset. So
there's bootleg liquids, like they're bootlegging the actual liquids in the bottles?
Yeah, there are some unscrupulous characters out there. And, you know, I urge you to, you know, if you really want to be sad, start doing some research on a guy named Rudy Kurniawan, who faked countless collectors. He was literally, he was able to print up these perfect replicas of labels, 82 Petrus, you know, legendary wines. And then he was actually sort of making concoctions of wines, because look, most people have never had an 82 Petrus or a 61 Latour, whatever it might be. So he was able to create these liquids. Maybe there was some younger Petrus in there, and he would add some other wines so the color looked adequate. And people would sort of convince themselves that this was legit. He even went so far, Dan, as to take the corks, right? And he would take like newer vintages of great producers' corks and gently scratch off the vintage on there. So, well, is it 1982? maybe it was, you know, 92. And people did it. So provenance is everything. Make sure you know what you're buying and from.
What Brian said is rampant in my world of the upper echelon of the most expensive timepieces and complicated timepieces in the world. It's the bootlegging that everyone probably thinks is going on is, oh, my Rolex bracelet is fake, or my Patek bracelet is fake. I'll throw the brand names to you guys. I have watches here that are Pateks. modern Pateks, and the movement and Rolexes, the movement, the guts inside is fake. And it's not what you guys are thinking when I open up the back and it's got a Chinese sticker on it. It's not like that anymore, everybody. They've bootlegged every single part, every nut, every bolt, every the whole movements, even Pateks. They're so close that even I sometimes can be tricked by some of it. Even obviously I've seen everything, but the more modern movements, what we were speaking about earlier that people are collecting, those are the really, really dangerous movements. So be really, really careful. I've seen people get burned. I could take parts from the bootleg and put them in the real calibers and they will work. So don't think like you're going to be able to tell with a magnifying glass or anything. You've had to have seen and worked on, like me, rip apart the entire movements down to the plates to know that these things are fake. So be careful.
A vintage watch dealer that I've...
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, just piggybacking on that, a vintage watch dealer who I've dealt with for years, great guy. He once told me he refers to these watches as Frankenstein's monster watches. Some of the parts might be original, some of them may be very, very good fakes, and it's really hard. It's scary out there. Well, I said before, be careful. It's just some things that people don't know in the watch world is the Swiss law is 20 years, no more parts. It's hard enough for a watchmaker to get a parts account, but they do not have to supply anything. And these older, even just Rolexes are being refused. And most companies, they don't want old watches on the street. They want you, hey, I'm sorry, we cannot repair this. We have no more parts. So, but look over here in the shiny case and there's a nice new one. Now, luckily, there are people like me, well, not many, where I'm a manufacturer, right? I can make parts within my facility, pretty much any part to any watch, because I'm also an indie watch builder. There's not many of us outside of Switzerland. I think I'm pretty much the only guy here in this country. Just be careful out there.
So buyer beware. We're going to move to segment 3.
Passion and expertise are vital in the world of collectible investments, where knowledge and personal interest can lead to significant financial rewards. Passionate collectors often immerse themselves in the details of their chosen field, whether it's watches, wines, or cars. This deep engagement not only enhances their enjoyment, but also equips them with the insights needed to make informed investment decisions. Expertise in the market allows investors to identify undervalued items, understand historical trends, and authenticate pieces accurately. Being part of enthusiast communities provides networking opportunities and access to insider knowledge. For those starting out, it's essential to focus on what you love, whether it's vintage watches or fine wines. Educate yourself thoroughly, engage with experts, and always ensure the authenticity of your purchases. The satisfaction of owning a well-researched, meaningful piece can be as rewarding as the potential financial returns. Passion, combined with knowledge, is the key to success in collectible investments.
Dan, to follow up on what you were saying about perhaps lesser known or smaller brands, how does one learn about that? We just have to call you up and annoy you and talk to you all the time?
I don't have time for you. No, really, it's the whole fun of pulling some money out and investing is the hunt, the look, and to learn. Learning should be the premier thing in your life that occupies your mind, keeps your mind busy. So there's plenty of information on the internet now. That's what the internet was actually invented for, right? It was supposed to be the big Encyclopedia Britannica for the world, and nothing more, really. That was where it was supposed to be. So that information is out there. Instagram is your friend, basically, for watches. There's some serious vintage watch collectors, men and women, who went down this rabbit hole. And they also seek guidance from someone like me. I know there's a really big woman vintage collector in London who has a very good watchmaker guiding her. So it's not just, oh, I fell in love with this timepiece. It's so beautiful on my wrist. That's not it. It's like, how many of these were made? How many are left? How many are butchered? How many have not been polished through the years? How can we hunt one down? And it's the hunt. Once you hunt and you find it, then it's what condition it is in. Someone like me opens it back up for collectors. The watch comes here before they purchase, just like you buying a used Ferrari. It's going to be checked out by the trusted Ferrari mechanic that you trust. It's the same scenario. So learn online, and I do answer questions with my collectors once they get on board here in what I do.
Jasem, talking about Instagram, your following is a testament to your passion for watches. Can you talk about the community that you've built? Like, how have they influenced your collection?
Good question. Yes, they have. I think it's been a tough journey, to be honest with you. I think Instagram is and seeking internet popularity can take its toll on somebody's psyche, on somebody's emotions, on somebody's bank account. And so when I was starting my page, I wanted to become the most relevant, the most popular, the superstar of the Patek Philippe. And so I was buying even things that I did not want. I just wanted to buy them because I was the first. I wanted to be the most relevant. I wanted to be the coolest guy. And so I made a lot of mistakes during the journey. And the mistakes were basically because I was buying not things that I did not love. And I made a decision, many years and many mistakes and many losses into it, that I wanted to be who I am. And so the page, if you'll see it, has transformed from, if you go back, if you have the time to go back to the first post, you see a complete shift into what the page has become now. It's become everything that represents me. I'm an avid cigar smoker. Been to Cuba a billion times. I'm a huge car lover. Nick, my dream car is a 360 Stradale, just to let you know. So we are going to be friends. I'm
You and me both.
I'm a Rolex lover. I'm every watch lover. So now I post about everything and anything that I love and that I believe in. I think I was. I think my page and my followers swayed me, and I think I now sway people. So I think it has changed. The roles have changed. I do what I pretty much want to do, and I don't care how they react to it. I think people love that because then I'm honest and I'm pure, and I don't. There's no bullshit. There's no sugarcoating anything. I'm not paid by any sponsor. There's no watch company that pays me to write anything, so I can be me, and I think people really love that. And this is why. I don't have 34 million followers. I'm not Kim Kardashian, but I think in a very tight watch community, 340,000 followers is not a bad number.
Well, it sounds like, as far as social media influence, that you have matured. Early on, you had one famous photo. I think you had many watches going around your steering wheel. Can you talk about that? And do you think it was necessary to start with a big splash so that you could get a following going?
No, not really. I'll tell you the story of that photo. I at the time owned a 3.8 Porsche GT3 RS. I was much skinnier, so I can fit in that car, and I used to go to Bahrain's F1 circuit and race that car. And in that phase of the watch collecting journey, I actually really liked Nautiluses. I don't hate them, but I don't love them as much as I used to. And you can buy Nautiluses, used Nautiluses, for a 30% discount off retail. So, like for instance, if a 5726 grade dial traded for retailed for 35 or 40K, you can literally buy one in Kuwait for 24,000. So 5711, for instance, retailed for 26,000, and you can buy one for 19,000. That was the days. And so I bought Nautiluses every time I found one. So every time I went to a shop, hey, what's going on? What do you have? I see. So I had I don't know, maybe 14 Nautiluses. And so one day I met one of my friends who had a GT2 RS, and we were driving on the coast in Kuwait, and I had a bag with all my watches, and I wanted to take pictures of them and stuff. I wanted to get into photography so I can take really good pictures for the Instagram. And he suggested, why don't you put all these watches on the steering wheel of his car. So I actually had it on a GT2 RS steering wheel. And so that was the picture. And then Anish made it popular. And then the rest is history.
That's really cool. Brian, can you talk about like how does passion guide your decisions for purchasing wine, for investing?
Yes. So buy what you love. You know, I'm consulting for a private client right now on his collection, and I'm dividing up his collection right now into 3 categories: sell, keep aging, or drink. And the ones that I'm recommending he drink are wines that he bought because he genuinely loved them and continues to love them. And, you know, maybe they're getting towards the end of their supposed drinking window. Maybe he won't be able to get quite as much of a return on the investment as he once would have. But guess what? He gets to actually use those bottles for what they were initially intended for. And even if he's taking somewhat of a hypothetical financial hit in not getting such a huge return on the investment, he's actually having the opportunity to enjoy those bottles that he's been staring at for years and in many cases decades. He gets to create memories with his family and friends and loved ones. And there's something to be said for that as well. You know, and he knows the provenance is great. He knows these bottles are going to be wonderful, but there's also, you know, what we're all talking about today is there is a sense of emotionality to everything, whether your passion lies in cars or watches or wine or, you know, rare spirits. And being able to open up that bottle is really the same feeling as being able to strap onto your wrist that Patek that you love, to be able to get behind the wheel of that vintage Ferrari. So I always say, buy and invest in what you love, because you can always pop that cork and enjoy it. And that's deeply, deeply important.
Yeah, I think he's right. It's Nick, Brian, and what I do in the vintage world. Some of the stuff I missed when I was building my watch for about 5 years is the humanness that's attached to an intangible piece of metal. That to me, metal is alive because I've seen it come alive. But what freaks me out, and why I love doing what I do, and you already see the portion of this facility here, is people have lost their favorite watchmakers. When they were growing up, their dad or their grandpa had a Calatrava from the 40s or 50s or whatever it was, a Patek, whatever they had, a Vacheron, like my family, right? My dad had a lot of Vacherons from my grandfather. But there's no one left to kind of fix those old watches. So they went out and they bought a new Nautilus and they strapped it on their wrist, right? And they put those watches in the safe, especially in this area in Palm Beach. Well, now that they find someone like me, they start pulling them out of the safe. And I can restore them. I can make the gears or the pinions and bring them back to life. They can't believe I can do that. But when I do, and they come through the door and I show them that watch that hasn't ticked, it's not the watch. All of a sudden, a flood of emotion and memories come back. They could have been like me sitting in the back of my dad's Cadillac, driving up to the country house and always seeing his, Vacheron on his wrist, on the steering wheel, and they start crying. I mean, some of them, they hug me, and it's awesome, and that is the connection we have with Nick and the Ferraris, with Brian and his wine. Could be a memory. They pop a bottle of wine, and it's reminiscent of what they were doing as a child or what they saw with their parents. It's the same thing in my world. That's why I always guide people in their collections to, yes, purchase something and have it checked out and bring it here, but it's something that will be generational. If you're just a flipper, that doesn't really excite me. I'm not in this for the money. I'm in it for those experiences, and to bring those experiences to the people, like as I just explained. The love that we have, it can transcend generations. 2 generations from now, that same Patek can come out of the safe, and those memories are still attached to that one timepiece. I find that fascinating.
Dan, I just experienced this viscerally with my family this past Saturday night. My dad's collection, he's been storing it. My good friend Scott Ziskin has a wonderful wine storage facility in New Jersey called My Cellars. So my dad's collection, between his wine fridges and Scott's My Cellar, everything has been kept in pristine condition. So my father just celebrated a very important birthday, and he decided to pull a bottle of 1995 Chateau Margaux that he bought on release. And he could have sold that bottle for a ridiculous return on his initial investment. But he's always said, I think this is the wine that I want to share with my family for this milestone birthday.
Right on,
so
right
on
on.
Saturday night, we went to my mom and dad's place. It was my wife and daughters and my sister and brother-in-law and their sons. And my father popped the cork on that. And I will tell you, that seeing the look on his face and experiencing that profound moment when the aroma of this bottle that we've been staring at for decades filled the air, and pairing it with an amazing meal that my mother made, I got to believe that's the greatest return on investment for something like that. So there's really, there are benefits in so many ways when it comes to investing in what you're passionate about. I've also had clients who have invested heavily in, Grand Cru Burgundy, let's say, and they'll buy, if they have access to it, they'll buy multiple cases of these great wines, and they'll set aside 80% of it to hold on to and then ultimately sell as a financial vehicle. But then they keep a case or half a case, whatever it might be, to be able to enjoy, whether for business purposes, family purposes. So I love that sort of dual utility of these things that we can invest in.
Wonderful.
May I say something very quickly?
Sure.
I think sometimes the greatest investments that we make in life are those that we don't think about them as investments. It's a gut feeling, right? It's Brian who loves wine. Maybe he has this feeling about a special vintage, a special year, a special maker, and he buys X amount of bottles just because he loves them. And then one day things happen to go his way. And I'll tell you a very small story. So Brian, you and I have also something in common, obviously not in wine. I live in Kuwait and alcohol is not permitted here. But I'm an avid cigar smoker and a collector of Cuban cigars. I call myself now a collector. I was just a smoker and a hoarder. And at one time, I had bought 55 boxes of Cohiba 1966. I bought each box for $500. Last year, I sold my last box for $6,000 a box.
Wow.
The world of cigars have come into this crazy realm. And again, cigar needs to be aged well. There's a lot of fakes. You can be spooked. You have to buy it from a reputable source, and it has to have good provenance. So I know exactly what you're saying, my friend.
Score a win for the hoarder.
Yeah, always.
I just wanted to say something really quickly about what Dan was saying, and well, all of you were saying. It's a little metaphysical and a little bit romantic, but it's true. And I think that objects do tend to keep the energy of people that had them. So a very old watch, just like a car, is filled with the energy of someone that maybe raced in it or did extraordinary things or terrible things with that watch. And it's metaphysical, and I can't prove it, but we all feel it somehow. And the energy of people lives on in objects. And that's fascinating. That transcends time and money and everything else. I know it's romantic, but allow me to digress.
Said like a true Italian. Thank you, Nicki. We're going to move to segment 4.
Research and understanding market dynamics are important in the world of collectible investments, whether dealing with watches, wines, or cars. Due diligence involves verifying the authenticity, provenance, and condition of each asset. For instance, classic cars should be checked for originality and maintenance history, while fine wines require confirmation of proper storage and provenance. Watches must be authenticated by experts to avoid counterfeits. Auction results provide insights into current market trends, helping investors gauge the value and demand for specific items. Platforms like Sotheby's and Christie's offer historical sales data that can guide investment decisions. Expert appraisals offer authoritative assessments based on rarity, condition, and market trends. Understanding market dynamics, such as historical performance and emerging trends, is key to predicting future value. Monitoring these factors helps investors identify opportunities and make informed decisions.
We talked a little bit about fraud. Brian talked about how there is, counterfeit wine out there. Brian, how important is understanding the global market trend, like the economy, when investing in fine wine?
It's deeply important because as the global wine market has expanded, just like it has with watches, just like I would imagine it has with cars, there's inherently more competition for a by definition finite product. So understanding that is important. It's also important to understand, which producers are seeming to be on that hot streak in places where maybe the world of collectible fine wine was not so important historically. It's understanding also the global market of wine. It's important for understanding your historical sales data, right? Because now all of a sudden you're competing with a huge global marketplace of collectors, of investors of fine wine. So it's gotten harder and harder to acquire these liquid assets. But it's because of that, I think it's also important to maybe start thinking ahead, just like Jasem said when he bought that critical mass of vintage Cohibas. Because he was passionate about it and it turned out to be a great investment. It's the same thing with wine. So maybe, look to up and coming regions, look to producers who are doing very exciting things, right? I mean, there was a time when Screaming Eagle or Harlan were findable and much more readily affordable. And it took someone to say, hey, I think these guys have something here. And they just started buying into it. So it's important to understand Clos de Ménil from Krug is always going to be a good investment, right? The first growths of Bordeaux are always going to be a good investment, maybe sometimes more, sometimes less, but the market is going to be going up. But also look to up and coming regions, look to regions that are maybe not up and coming, that have generations worth of fine wine experience and provability that maybe haven't quite hit yet on that international auction and collectors market. So, keep an eye out, cast a broad web while also following the classics when looking for investment opportunities in wine.
Jasem, with the cigars, you mentioned trusting your gut. When it comes to buying luxury items, do you only buy from authorized dealers? Do you go to the gray market? Do you buy privately from an individual? Any tips on doing the due diligence beyond your gut?
If you want to buy modern, it's pretty straightforward. If you want to buy vintage, you have to find a good, trustworthy watchmaker or a dealer or an auction house or a scholar. And there are out there, okay? You can also do a lot of homework. The world has changed immensely in terms of knowledge, in terms of people sharing their history. There's a lot of people doing on that front in order to mitigate some of the risks that you may take if you haven't done your homework. In terms of what to buy, I think you should just buy what you love. I've always said this to people. I think, especially when it comes to watches, if you wear a watch on your wrist, you better smile when you see the watch. If the watch doesn't make you smile, regardless of whatever you think the investment potential in the future may be, it would suck if you were wrong and you still hated the watch on your wrist. might as well like what you wear. It's very important to talk to someone that you know. If I have a minute to take from everybody's time, I'll tell you a little story, and it may there's a good lesson here. And many years ago, I had put an absentee bid to buy a watch with a lot of Americana. So there's a lot of history behind the watch. It was a watch that was given by Vice President Roosevelt, Rockefeller, to his attorney. And there was a 1463, a beautiful reference from Patek Philippe from the 1940s, I believe, and it had Breguet numerals. I paid, I think, $150,000. When the watch arrived in Kuwait, the condition of the case was terrible. It was like basically polished down to its bare teeth. And I hated the watch. I kept it in my safe for about a year and then sold it to a dealer in California who really loved watches with American history. I made a tiny profit, so barely just over inflation. And 2 years later, I found the watch, same watch, and it had a brand new case, but it was the same case. It wasn't recased. And I found out that the watch had went to Hungary, out of all places, and there was a guy there who had an amazing way of tacking on gold to the existing case and rebuild it. So he wasn't building a new case, he was taking the same case and doing it. And so I made a decision that day, is that I want to protect people from getting basically screwed. So I went out and I bought every imaginable auction house catalog going back to the antiquarian days of the 1980s. And I have a huge library, so that one day I can digitize all that stuff and have it on the internet, so you can have reference to, what was the dial like, when it was auctioned many years ago, or sold, or appeared here and here and here. And so homework, do your homework and make sure you talk to people, and not one person, talk to a lot of people.
Wow, that's hardcore passion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like collecting anything. You discussed earlier, like how would you learn about vintage watch world or indie watch world, mainly vintage, and you'll see when you get into it, or if you're already starting halfway down the rabbit hole, that you'll see pages, say on Instagram, of a collector, and in the beginning of their page, they were all over the place, buying this, buying that, while they learn, and then eventually they usually pigeonhole to one brand, because just learning that one brand's pieces is vast. It's fast, and you can never know what I know, because I know from the inside out. They're trying to learn from the outside in. I mean, I know the numbers to every part for every movement that company made. Because you mentioned like obscure brands, and it won't even seem obscure to you, like Movado. So everyone is going to think Movado with the battery thing and the numbers on the dial Movado, but Movado has an incredible mechanical history, chronographs, and one of the most incredible microengineering watches called a polyplan, which is a watch on 3 different planes where the gears are connecting to each other. There's very, very few out there. Watches like that will escalate, but pick a brand that you want to really deep dive into. And the reason all those brands will escalate is from the inside out. So talk to your watchmaker, because years and years and years ago, when those weren't vintage and they were coming across my bench just for a service, those old watches from NCAR and Movado, whatever these off brands and main brands were, when there was no parts left, which is what I spoke about modern watches, or a mounted mini recorder spring on a chronograph was broken, there's no more parts. We couldn't make those parts. They're too skinny, even if from traditional ways. It's not viable, and it's not monetarily viable if the watch wasn't worth $150K back then, like they are now, which everything pretty much that comes across my bench is in that realm. They were only worth $2,000-$3,000, or maybe a Patek was worth $5,000 or $6,000 back then. It wasn't worth my time. So the person would just literally leave those watches with the watchmaker. That's why you always see like parts boxes for sale on eBay of movements, because that was it. The watch was done. So all those watches that they made yearly back then, the supply has dwindled over all those years of watchmakers just putting the movement in the drawer, telling that customer, I'm sorry, I can't fix your watch. There is no more parts. We don't make parts. It's not viable. Now, because of CNC and the accuracy that we can have them, it's quite expensive, for internal parts to have a CNC machine like I would have. I mean, most of them are around $1 million. We can save those watches now and make the parts that are missing. So what the watches that are out there and vintages that are left out there, especially chronographs and perpetual calendars and complicated timepieces, I can actually make those parts if the watch's value matches the time that I would spend to resurrect those watches. Even the cases, if they're no longer waterproof, have been damaged. I have lasers nowadays, micro laser machines that can fill in all the holes, and then re-lapping and putting the cases back on the lathe by hand, and turning those cases back into being okay and usable once again, which in the past we couldn't do. If you came in with a case that had deep scratches, or it wasn't waterproof anymore, or one of the lugs was broken off, that was it. No matter what the watch was, if it was a Man on the Moon Omega like we were talking about earlier, that watch was done. I'm sorry, I can't fix your watch. It's not worth it. Go get a new watch. Now we can resurrect what's left. So you really got to be careful out there. If it is a real 1960s Man on the Moon with a 321 inside, and you really want to spend some money, I mean, it's not 150, but it's going to get up there eventually. You got to be careful. Bring it to someone like me, wherever you live in the world, a local watchmaker that's properly trained that can eyeball those kind of things.
Nicki, we saw your son. You put him down. Do you see any trends in the travel and tourism market that might relate to classic cars, watch, and wine markets?
Well, how do you mean trends?
Well, I didn't know if demand and travel, and if I feel like things are interconnected when it comes to, even in this discussion today, we see that there's a common interest often in cars and watches, or wine and watches. I didn't know if travel is also related, and if you're privy to any insights.
Well, sure. I think we have to. I don't mean to sound elitist or unreasonable, but there is an elite market, and that market goes straight through, in my case, Tuscany. We get all sorts of tourists, and they can be, hit and run tourists that are just there for the day, or people that, or students that stay in the hostels, or there's the high level tourist, which will kind of rent the properties that we have, that will have the Pateks on their wrists, that will be buying the artwork in the galleries, and that will be interested in the cars. So yes, it's connected at a very high level for what this panel is dealing with, because these are also the same people that'll buy the 1995 Brunellos in the restaurants. As for my son, he's here making a little bit of noise. I'm sorry if you can hear that in the background, but he's
awesome.
He's playing.
It's awesome.
Driving a Ferrari.
Yes, he loves. So we had a Lamborghini Huracan Evo Spider for filming, and it was the last day of school. And I don't usually do this because I don't like to do it, but I went and picked him up from school in that thing, and I made his year. I think he didn't sleep for a couple of nights thinking of that. So, and I have my driveway is very long, so I kind of, really pushed the pedal to the metal along the driveway for a little bit, and he was mesmerized by this thing. So he loves cars too. Hopefully he'll get into watches as well. My father-in-law is an avid watch collector. I'm not, honestly. I love watches, but I'm not a collector. He has a number of Pateks, of which I have one, and I have a Vacheron Constantin. But my daily drive is I get so much stuff done with this. Of course, for a nice evening out with a great bottle of wine in a Ferrari and a nice restaurant, I'll obviously put a Patek on, with much pleasure.
If anyone's just joining us, you're watching Inspired Money, Portfolio Perspectives, Balancing Watch, Wine, and Car Investments. And we're going to bring it home and go to our last segment.
Building a balanced investment portfolio that includes alternative assets like watches, fine wines, and classic cars requires strategic planning. Consider diversification, achieved by spreading investments across both traditional assets, like stocks and bonds, and alternative ones, to manage risk and optimize returns. A common strategy involves allocating a small percentage, typically 10 to 20%, to alternative investments. This helps balance the higher risks and lower liquidity of these assets, while benefiting from their potential for returns and low correlation with traditional markets. For example, during economic downturns, alternative assets often show resilience, as seen with fine wines during the 2008 financial crisis. Incorporating these assets also provides personal enjoyment, as collectors derive satisfaction from owning rare items. It's crucial to conduct thorough research, engage with experts, and regularly rebalance your portfolio to maintain the desired allocation. Setting clear financial goals ensures that your investments align with your long-term objectives.
Jasem, I wanted to ask you, because with new watches, any thoughts on new limited editions and collaborations? How do you assess whether these will hold long-term value or be a more short-term thing?
Good question. I don't think if anyone can tell you whether anything's going to hold long-term value in today's market. I'm not sure anyone can tell you anything can hold value. I think, especially, listen, I've spent 18 years of my life doing equities. I was buying and selling stocks every day, and I've always I've always known and told and etc. that an asset needs to be backed by something that makes money, a company or a service or whatever. With these tangible assets that we love, at the end of the day, the asset itself there's nothing behind it. There's nothing makes money. There's no company. There's no income stream. There's no dividends, etc., etc. And what pushes anything up is popular opinion. So whether if you look at the watch world today, Piaget is all of a sudden the big hero. Everybody's talking about Piagets, etc., etc. It's been pushed by TikTok rhetoric. 2 years ago, it was Philips pushing the Audemars Piguet, especially the 39 perpetuals and the 39 skeletons, etc. 4 years ago, it was the day-date move by Philips, and they created something called the day-date auction, and they created something called the Speedmaster auction. There's the world of the thematic auction. Philippe Dufour was an independent watchmaker known for beautiful finishes, struggled for many years to move and sell any of his watches, and only found a market in Japan until Hodinkee covered him and became one of the most sought after watches of this generation. And so you look at the whole world, and if you buy something you like and nobody covers it, guess what? You shit out of luck. And so this is it. So I don't think anyone can predict. Obviously, because this is a highly unregulated market and a huge market, you can play a lot of hanky-panky games. You can push rhetoric. You can pay someone to cover something you want it to be covered. You can corner markets because sometimes additions are 50 or 60 or 70 deep, and so if you have 10 million bucks, you can corner a market, write about something, and push a product up. And this was the case for maybe Debutante to 1.5 or 2 years ago, when watches were trading for 50 and 60. All of a sudden, they were trading for 600, 700, and FP Journe also was the case. So if you look at all these parameters and you look at from a purely financial, purely trading, purely stock market nonsense, you have to go back to the old saying: buy what you love. Make sure these assets represent not a significant portion of your asset makeup of your portfolio. 10-20% is usually cool. And enjoy life. Wear the watches you want. Shift the gears in a beautiful Ferrari or a Porsche or a Lamborghini. Drink a great wine, right? Smoke good cigars, and hopefully they make some money or hold some money in the future. At the end of the day, there's other ways you can invest your money, and it's not here.
Sounds like a good investor. Well said.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with pretty much everything he just said. But be educated as well. But be educated. I'm always going to be the guy who's the watchmaker and give you all a completely different perspective than the collector, who, again, like we spoke about earlier, knows the serial numbers and the limited edition bullshit. That I work in Switzerland, heading up one of the biggest watch companies around, and all their watchmakers. So I know how it all works behind the scenes, which not many people, and certainly no Americans, are privy to. So just be careful out there, even in the new watch world, because I also do complicated timepieces. And I know the flippers that come through my doors that come in with the big suitcase of all their name brand Pateks or whatever, you know, trading from one company to another in the gray market. And, you know, when I look inside those watches, maybe they are 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years old. They're not vintage. They're just, you know, pre-owned timepieces. Sometimes they've just been sitting in a safe. They're all running dry with no oil for I don't know how long. And they're winding them to show every customer that they might have if it's not like an instant sale. So every one of them needs a complete breakdown to the plates and proper watchmaker to see it and clean it. And that's not always done because it's just like the car salesman that we know. They just want to get that watch out. They bring it to a watchmaker and tell them how fast and how cheap can you just get this thing running and, you know, keep in decent time so I can flip this thing. It's just like cars, bro. And I'm being honest with everybody out there from the inside out. It's not just be careful, it's not fake. It's how long has that thing been running dry? Because like this Rolex on my bench here from the 60s and other, I mean, I see them all the time here. They're running dry for a long time is the equivalent of your Ferrari running dry with no oil. It'll run for a while, but you're scoring all the piston rings, the inside of the piston liner walls. It's the exact same thing as what I see every day. Now, can I restore that timepiece? If it's a new piece, it's just part swapping. You can, you know, if a watchmaker is traditionally trained in a school, that's what he's trained for. You got an account, so you work for a jewelry store, a big store, they order the parts and you put the new parts in. But be careful with that watch now that they did some of that if they did it correctly. Because if they didn't and don't have those parts, they're just going to get it running again. And then the next guy's going to just get it running again because he doesn't have those parts account. They're very hard to get outside of Switzerland. And then 30, 40 years from now, that watch is completely trashed from the inside out. So be wary, be careful, have trust in your watchmaker. As you know, you would have trust in your wine expert or like Nick, you know, with you know, guiding someone to the proper guy who knows those particular Ferrari engines by the serial number, because that dude's doing them all day long. And the reason that Jasem was saying certain very complicated watches like perpetual calendars go up and down all the time is those people buy them, they get excited, and then they bring them to me and I tell them how much it costs to service that thing. Now, being the watch is expensive and it's usually that clientele somewhat doesn't care. It's not just the bill. In Switzerland and how complicated these timepieces are at that level is one person is hired to do complications just for that one perpetual calendar. It may have a perpetual chronograph with, you know, moon phase and other complications in it. And he's trained over a year's time, over and over, just on that one watch, meaning that one caliber. Caliber can be in other watches doing the same thing. That's all that guy does, because that's how complicated that is, and all the little idiosyncrasies that go along with the mechanics in that watch. It's that complicated. You can't just bring it to your watchmaker who says, I do perpetual calendars, and he takes it apart the first time and puts it back together. I know you can take pictures nowadays with your phone and get it back together. He's not putting your watch together correctly. And then it doesn't run right. Then you try to set the date at the wrong time of the day. Now you jam something up. So now that watch is going back to Switzerland for a minimum of 2 years. You're not going to see it again. So the love affair kind of fades on those kind of watches if they're not taken care of correctly. I say, you know, steer clear of the very, very super complicated watches. If you want one in your lifetime, you know, buy one and enjoy it. Just like he said, buy to enjoy, because if you're a collector, that's what's going to drive your passion anyway, and drive you to learn more about that particular brand you love, be it Patek, or be it vintage, or be it the whole indie world, which is a whole other investment area that all collectors are just jumping on, trying to get those limited supplies of these handmade timepieces.
Love it. Thanks for the insights. Brian, for a wine collection, can you talk a little bit about striking a balance between investing in a top tier, you know, well-known wine versus buying some more niche and potentially undervalued vintages to round out a collection?
Absolutely. I mean, and look, there are, you know, investment vehicles that you can look at. There's VinX, there's VinoVest, and, you know, you may you may or may not ever, actually lay your hands on the bottles. It's treating it like any other, commodity that you may or may not hold. But in terms of building a collection, yes, and this is what I always recommend to my clients is, I love these legendary wines. But if we're having like pizza on a Tuesday night, maybe I just want to open up $20 or $30 or $40 bottle that's going to be wonderful. So like, let's talk about Italy, right? So, let's say you love Piedmont, you love your Barolo, you love your Barbaresco. So within those specific places, buy vintages from, the producers that you love, maybe even from a producer like Angelo Gaia, who's a legend, who's done as much as anybody else in the last 100 years for the Italian wine world. Buy vintages of his wines that are meant to age for 30 years, buy other vintages with different weather and climatic conditions that'll be better in 10 to 15 years. Then if you love the wines of that particular region, sure, stock up on your Barolo and Barbaresco, but then also start acquiring wines from other parts of Piedmont, start acquiring Barbera, start acquiring Dolcetto, because these are wines that still give you a taste of the terroir of the region, different grape varieties, of course, but also very different price points. So diversifying a collection across the wine world, but also diversifying within the places and the grape varieties that you love most is really a rewarding way to build a collection that you can enjoy when you have a big anniversary, when you have something important happening with your work life. But you also can have wines that punch way above their weight for 30, 40, 50 bucks that are almost just as exciting a lot of the time. So diversity is the key.
Hey, Brian, here at Palm Beach, I'm starting to see a lot of South African wines. Can you clue us in a little on that? I see they're nodding their head, so it's obviously everywhere. My girl is from Cape Town, so she clued me in on all the wineries there and showed me, her hometown there. That's vast, and I never knew that at all. Can you clue us all in on that?
Yeah, so the world of South African wine is fascinating, right? So often people tend to divide the wine world into the old world and the new world, right? The old world being the classic growing regions of Europe, the new world being everywhere that's not the classic growing regions of Europe, right? Which has always been painting with too broad a brush. South Africa is very interesting because they've been making wine there since the 1600s, right? I mean, the old trading routes, you had to go around the southern tip of Africa to get from, the Atlantic to the Indian Ocean and vice versa. So, South Africa was a natural place for these trading ships to stop and sort of recollect gear for the remaining part of the voyage. So what do you collect? You need food, you need non-alcoholic things to drink, but also you need to re-up with the wine. So the South African wine industry goes back centuries. Because of the years of apartheid, that industry more or less stopped in its tracks. It was like like cryogenically frozen, right? If you can do that for a wine growing country, apartheid then ends, and then it starts opening up. And it turns out that South Africa, in particular, the Western Cape, but also other parts of the country as well, you have this incredible diversity of terroirs, fabulous, fascinating microclimates. And the wines of South Africa, I think, are deeply exciting. There's such energy there in the grape growing and winemaking community. I think they're incredibly exciting. Right now, in terms of investing, I'm not seeing anything quite yet that's going to be approaching the level of, the classic wine growing regions of Europe or California, what have you, some of the more legendary high altitude vineyards in Argentina and Chile. But certainly from a diversity of styles and terroirs, and just from a sense of the energy propelling that industry forward, South Africa is a place that is well worth exploring in your glass. And also, honestly, if you can get down there to the Western Cape, it's one of the most beautiful wine growing regions in the world. I mean, you got mountains and you have sea within like a couple hours drive. It's just wonderful.
Sounds beautiful. Nicki, your final thoughts?
Mike, Mike.
Nicki, you're muted.
Sorry, it's because my son's making a little bit of noise. I'm going to go back to something that everybody's been saying in their own way. Dan, Jasem, and Ryan, everybody's been saying it, which is live and use things. Specifically for cars and watches, if you don't use these objects, they will punish you for not using them. Or if you go and have them maintained by someone who is not equipped to maintain them, a fine Patek or a Rolex, much like a 5-valve per cylinder, naturally aspirated V8, handmade in Maranello, if you get a quack to do those jobs, you're gonna have a bad time. You're gonna spend a lot of money. You have to use things. By using them, maintenance is going to be actually easier. And as for wines, drink the good wine. Save it. I mean, of course, save it for a while, but there's no sense. It's like putting plastic on couches. And if you have plastic on your couch,
I'm in the land of that here, by the way, in Florida.
We can't be friends. Yeah, exactly. Well, Florida, God's waiting for them.
My grandma had.
But don't. If you put plastic on your couch, we can't be friends because we're not going to have anything in common. Sorry.
Yep.
Thank you, everybody. I want to thank the Inspired Moneymakers for tuning in today. One of the biggest takeaways for me from this discussion is really at the value of looking beyond traditional assets. And as was mentioned several times today, invest in what you love, buy what you love, trust your gut. And if I can share a call to action for all of you, take inventory of any items in your home that may have hidden value. This is especially important if you have items passed down through your family. Make sure you sit down with your parents or your grandparents and ask them about items that they think might be valuable, whether it's art, jewelry, collectibles. These pieces might not carry, well, they may not only carry sentimental value, but they could also be valuable investments. And frequently after a family member passes away, these valuable belongings could be thrown out or given away. So take time to make sure that this doesn't happen. I want to thank our incredible panelists today for sharing their insights and their time with us. Hello to Nicki's son for joining at the end. And I just appreciate all the panelists' insights on passion investing. I want to let you know where you can follow all of them. Jasem Al Zeraei dropped off. He's Patekaholic. You can find him on Instagram, instagram.com/Patekaholic. Dan Spitz is at danspitz.com. You can learn all about his watches, maintenance, building, and all the things that he's up to, including his music. Nick Baldelli-Boni is in Tuscany. Make sure that you subscribe to his Cars in Tuscany YouTube channel and Instagram channel. And I want to thank Brian Freedman as a regular contributor for Food and Wine, Forbes, Whiskey Advocate. You can find him in many different publications. His book, Crushed, check that out. And you can find him at brianfreedman.com. That's FREEDMAN.
I'm going to say briandfreedman.com. Without that middle initial, it's going to some other dude named Brian Freedman.
Oh, thank you for the correction.
Who sells counterfeit watches?
If you need to find me, my new facility is Delray Beach VintageWatches.com.
Oh, nice.
And if you got to find me on Instagram, it's at Freedman Reports.
Got it. Thank you, everybody. The next Inspired Money episode, it's going to be another fun one, the future of retirement, navigating changing trends and new possibilities. That will be next week, Wednesday, September 25th. Until next time, do something that scares you because that's where the magic happens. Thanks.